Within the Warhammer 40K universe, no two factions are as intertwined as Chaos and the Eldar. It was the psychically powerful Eldari that not only strengthened the ruinous powers, but eventually led to the creation of one of the Chaos Gods. Since the Enslaver Plague that terrorized the Eldar 60 million years ago, the entire species has had an incredible hatred for anything that comes out of the warp. Unfortunately for the Eldar, it is the same etheric force that allowed them to become superpowers in the galaxy that also nourishes the Chaos entities. And so the Eldari race has taken it upon themselves to protect the galaxy from the predations of chaos, similar to how an arbitrator protects the hive world from hive worlders themselves. They use so much of their resources not just to battle the forces of chaos, but also to prevent any rise in their power. They would gladly burn entire planets so long as the schemes of chaos do not come to pass centuries in the future. With the rise in power of the human race, the Eldar now watch with disgust as the primitive and backwards Imperium of man fumbles through life, acting as a pawn to the ruinous powers of chaos. Most wars and battles are fought due to the carelessness of humanity, and many Eldar have fought valiantly to end the spread of the corruption in the galaxy that was once theirs. It becomes the responsibility of the Eldar that follow the path of the warrior to defend and destroy chaos in all of its forms. An excellent example of this is seen in the story of the guardian Alariel. Alariel walked softly, aware that death watched and waited close at hand. The city was quiet, but it was not the quiet of death that lay over the place. It was the quiet of a hunting beast, lying in wait for its prey. He felt like a fly walking alongside a twitching spider web. The difference, he told himself, was that he was a fly who was aware of his situation, and he could deal death as well as receive it. His shuriken catapult rested comfortably in his hand. His comrades were strung out in a long line behind him. All around, the remains of the burnt-out hab units showed signs of recent battle. The scorched tracks of laser marred the walls. Bolter shards marked the doorways. This was the last great hab area of the city to be cleared. The sound of stealthy movement close at hand drew his attention. In a movement too fast for a human eye to follow, he whirled, bringing his weapon to bear on the source of the noise. For a moment he tensed, and then he realized that it was another Eldar squad. They were warp spiders. Their movements were sinister and scuttling, their strange four-armed battlesuits making them look like demons from ancient legends. Alariel eased his grip on the trigger. The warp spider made a strange flowing gesture, indicating that Alariel and his squad of guardians should move on, and that they would follow. It was typical of the spiders. When they took on their aspect, they became obsessed with stealthiness and surprising their prey. Alariel wondered what it must be like to enmesh your mind in the strange tangled path of the spider warriors. Of all of the aspect warriors he knew, they were the furthest removed from the normal Eldar mindset. There was something strange and frightening about them, even for his fellow Eldar. Many had become lost in the spider path, caught in its web, lost forever to their kin, as they locked themselves into their exarch persona. Still he knew that there was a danger to anyone who became too enamored to their aspect path, that they could become addicted to the alien perspective they assumed, and not wish to return to their everyday selves. Even Alariel had felt something of that seductive tug. Even as a guardian, he knew what it was like to put aside certain aspects of himself. When he donned the armor and mask, it became a necessity for him to suppress all the side of personality that knew fear, and any part of him that might feel the slightest empathy for the enemy. When he donned his armor and put on his mask, he became a killing machine, ruthless, fearless, and deadly. It was a necessity in this kill or be killed situations. Behind him, the others in his squad moved cautiously, gliding their feet forward carefully, testing the ground on which they walked before putting their weight on it. 2 days ago, they had almost lost Cathrian, who had fell through the floor and had been weakened by the ruins of the building. Ahead of them was a doorway. Alariel gestured for Cathrian to go forward on that point. Moving in a fighting crouch, his weapon held ready, the youth advanced and moved through the doorway. Alariel counted slowly to 3, and then followed him. The chamber he entered was a huge one. Obviously, it had been some sort of assembly hall for this section of the Hive City, perhaps even a temple of sorts. Dust danced in the columns of the light that filtered in through the stained glass roof, illuminating the area full of debris. Alariel inspected the roof. It was astonishing. Somehow, the enormous stained glass representation of the Emperor of Mankind had remained intact through the long months of civil war and the subsequent Eldar strike. It was a work of beauty to compare with any of his people. He was surprised that the Chaos Spawns had not destroyed it as they had destroyed so much else. He knew also that once the battle was over, he would draw inspiration from the sight of it and use it as a basis for one of his own paintings. He pushed that thought aside. It was a thought for when the war was over, not when he was a guardian. Throughout the other arches, Eldar warriors entered the ruined temple. He saw a squad of howling banshee aspect warriors and an exarch armed with a web of skulls. They advanced into the temple, and as they did so, the other Eldar squads entered. Suddenly, Alariel caught sight of a flicker of movement around the ruined altar. Without thinking, he brought his gun up to fire. He was rewarded with the screams of pain and the sight of a rag-clad cultist tumbling backwards out of cover. His men opened fire round about him, chipping bits of plascrete from the altar and reducing the image of the Emperor to a shapeless outline. Laser fire ripped up the air as the humans responded, their ambush sprung prematurely. Alariel heard Catherine scream as his armor bubbled and melted, and his head exploded, brains evaporating into a cloud of superheated steam. Alariel threw himself forward, seeking cover behind one of the enormous plascrete pillars, hoping that his warriors would do the same. He took a moment to check the situation. From their position of cover behind the altar, about a dozen shambling dressed humans fired with laser weaponry. Others were entering through the far archway of the chamber. Among them were many heavily armed beastmen. They were led by a group of black-armored Chaos Space Marines who advanced with bolters spitting death. There was even an enormous construct that looked like some sort of demonic robot, except for the fact that it rolled forward on two great wheels. All was chaos now. The howling of the banshees increased as they cartwheeled towards their enemy, in an eye-blurring dance of evasion that took advantage of every shred of cover. The Exarch hurled his web of skull at the wheeled thing, and was rewarded by seeing it entangled. Alariel took careful aim of one of the Chaos Space Marines and let it fly. His shot glanced at the Chaos Worshipper's baroque ornate armor. Laser bolts cracked through the air. Bolter shells carved great gouges out of the pillars behind which Alariel sheltered. He heard the demented screams of the chants of the Chaos Worshippers as they invoked their demon gun to watch over them while they fought. Their screams turned to howls of agony as the banshees leapt amongst them, striking left and right with their weapons, sending men toppling headless, blood fountains from their necks. Heavy treads came ever closer. Alariel watched as a Chaos Space Marine raced towards him, a mighty chainsword brandished in his black gauntlet fist. The weapon's eerie wail filled the air like the screams of a soul in torment. Alariel took a quick snapshot, but was driven back into cover by hails of fire from the newly arrived humans. He suddenly realized that the Eldar were outnumbered, and the thing looked grim. This had all the hallmarks of a trap. The Chaos Space Marine sprang into view, chainsword swinging. Alariel ducked. The great teeth of the chainsword's blade took an enormous bite out of the pillar. Chips of plascrete thrown off by the rotating blade pinged off of his armor. Old Serain sprang to his sergeant's assistant, swinging the butt of a shuriken catapult in a huge arc to connect with the Chaos Space Marine's head. There was a great clang, like the pealing of a hellish bell as he made contact. The Chaos Space Marine didn't even sway. He simply turned his burning red-eye gaze at the Guardian for a moment before his chainsword cleaved off his arm. With a shout of rage, Alariel threw himself forward, sweeping his weapon up to fire at the Chaos Worshipper from point-blank range. He never had a chance to fire. The Chaos Space Marine lashed out with his mighty mail fist and sent the sergeant tumbling to the ground. All around, silver stars mingled with the laser blast flickering across his vision. He looked up at the towering black-armored form of his foe, suddenly aware of even the tiniest of details. He noticed, as if for the first time, the tiny skulls worked into the Marine's armor, and the eldritch runes that blazed with their own internal fire on his chest plate. He saw the little flecks of blood and gristle on the blade of his chainsword as the Chaos Space Marine raised it high above his head. He saw the strange expression on the face of the stained glass Emperor, who glared down over the demon worshipper's shoulder. Desperately, Alariel tried to force his battered body to move. Slowly, far too slowly, his body began to respond. Alariel knew that he was going to die. Then it happened. The air shimmered, and a weird four-armed figure materialized from the empty air beside the Chaos Space Marine. Before the enemy could respond, he was entangled in a spinning web of monofilament wire. All features were temporarily obscured in the glistening silver haze. Then the warp spider made a tugging gesture with the hand that held the monofilaments, and the Chaos Space Marine simply fell apart, cut into tiny pieces by the incredibly sharp edge of the monofilament weapon. Alariel wiped the blood from his faceplate and looked up gratefully into the enigmatic mask of the warp spider. The spider made a cryptic gesture with his right lower hand, and then the air around him shimmered as he vanished again. Hastily, Alariel pulled himself to his feet and opened fire at the distant altar. There was still a battle to win, and the situation looked desperate. And then we have the reports of Exarch Elshar, who attempted to destroy the human cultists before they enacted a full-on demon incursion. Elshar climbed up and threw himself flat just before reaching the brow of the hill. From this vantage point, he surveyed the surrounding terrain. The place had been a park before the uprising, before the followers of Chaos had raised their standard on this world. Once there had been green trees, flower beds, and shady nooks, but Elshar did not care. He was an exarch, and beauty and peace meant nothing to him. For him a tree was just another piece of cover. A valley was a place to be temporarily out of the enemy's line of sight. A shadow was a place where death might lurk. For an exarch, there could be no peace. There were simply times when the killing stopped, when the warriors could hone their skills before the next battle. Once so long ago he can barely remember, it had been different. He had lived in his own chambers and followed a different destiny, a different path. He had memories of a time where he knew friendship, joy, and laughter, but that was before he heard the call of the Avatar, before he had become locked into the role of the Eternal Warrior. Those memories really belonged to someone else, to a being he once was, a person that had no relevance to his life today. He caught sight of movement up ahead. He ducked back and gestured to a squad of striking scorpions to halt. Years of constant training under his supervision had taught them to respond instantly to his command. They froze, becoming still as statues, into immobilities that drew no watching eyes. Elshar threw himself flat and scuttled, like a scorpion, up the slope on his hands and knees. He kept himself flat and low as he crossed the top of the slope, and found cover in a moonberry bush on the other side. He froze instantly and watched. Any second he expected a blast of enemy fire to cut him down, and yet at that idea he felt no fear. Only a dim sense that it would be a waste of his life without taking any of the enemies with him. His eyes studied the ravaged landscape, indexing the craters and the bushes and the burned-out trees, noting the points where the enemies might lurk, where lethal crossfire might be set up, or where the killing grounds might be. Once he might have been appalled by the waste of beauty and the torment the land had been put through. He could remember a time when the sight of a dead body would have made him sick, but that happened to that other person when he was young, after his first battle, when the horror and the fear had combined in a terrible reaction. There could be no such reaction now. A dead body was simply that, a husk that no longer contained a soul, a vehicle without a driver. He wondered when the slow, irreversible process of emotional petrification had begun. Perhaps when he first donned his aspect suit, when he had been like young Guranel back there, just beginning the study of the path of the Scorpion. That had certainly marked the beginning of a change, but it was not what changed him into an exarch. No. That probably came on Talanoth, when he had witnessed the demonic keeper of secrets devour the soul of the howling banshee called Shiera, and his entire squad had been slain except for him. He had known others who had gone mad after a battle, but he did not. He had chosen to preserve his sanity in the only way he knew. He had elected to become as proficient a death dealer as it was possible for him to become. His patience was rewarded. He caught sight of a human figure moving forward through the trees. Their battered armor and ill-maintained weapons marked them as rebels. The Eye of Horus sign on their banner reinforced that impression. They advanced cautiously. As he watched, he saw their leader kneel and speak into a vox communicator. They seemed to be unaware of his presence. His hand tightened involuntarily on the grip of his web of skulls. It was the sight of the Chaos banner that did it. In the frozen core of his mind, he felt that icy hatred flare. Talanoth had been a watershed for him, as it had been for so many others aboard the light in the infinite darkness. All of the Craftworld's warriors had been changed by their encounter with the demon and his minions. It had been at that point when he first realized that death, and worse than death, was possible for him. Till that fateful day he had been used to the idea that when he died his soul would be taken into a soul stone and patched into the infinity circuit aboard the Craftworld. He had thought that after his body died, his soul would be preserved forever, in constant contact with the millions of other Craftworld dead. After Talanoth, he had known that there was a worse fate waiting. He had seen Shiera's soulstone devoured by the demon as surely as Slaanesh had devoured the soul of the ancient Eldar. He had known that not even the final refuge of the Eldari race was safe, and since that day he was troubled. The humans advanced now. They moved warily, their heads scanning from side to side as they moved into the little valley. Their weapons were held in positions of exaggerated wariness. Occasionally they would exchange nervous words in their guttural, croaking language. They all seemed young and clumsy to him. Their movements lacked grace, just as their language lacked beauty. Mankind seemed like such an ill-made race to him. Nonetheless, he knew that their weapons were deadly. In the distance he heard the rumbling of tracks, and knew that some sort of tank was on the move. The Farseer's predictions were accurate then. There was to be a major thrust across the parkland towards the Eldar landing site. He knew it was imperative for them to stop the humans here, so that more warriors and materials could be transported down from the Craftworld ship and a beachhead established. It struck him that at that moment, across the vast city, this scene was being replicated 1,000 times. In buildings, parklands, ruined temples, and twisted alleys, man and Eldar waited and watched, each prepared to deal violent death to the enemy. The thought seemed irrelevant to him, so he dismissed it. The important thing here was to fight and to win. Nothing else mattered. He took deep regulated breaths. His muscles were loose, ready to respond in an instant to his mind's command. Once at a time like this, he would have been tensing and relaxing his muscles to keep them limber, to ease out the nerve-wracking tension. Now he was relaxed, in a state of constant readiness. For all the difference it made, he might as well have been back in the temple chamber, practicing with his weapons. And he knew, as a master fencer knows the strengths and weaknesses of his blade, that such relaxations would have made a difference. He knew he would not freeze when the moment of fight came. He knew he would not stand, muscle-locked, mind-numb, with terror, waiting for the killing blow to fall. The nearest human was within striking distance now. It was time. Elshar sprang, whirling the web of skulls in his hand. He felt the killing power in the weapon even as he released it. It spun through the air like an enchanted bolas. Each heavily weighted skull smashed into a target, smashing bone and crushing heads. 3 men fell, and with an eerie whine, the web turned to his hand. The humans stood frozen in shock. Their leader shouted a hasty order to them, and they began to swing their weapons to bear. They were too slow. Elshar lashed out the web of skulls once more. It whirled among the men, sending them flying unconscious to the ground. The last survivor turned to run. Elshar watched him go. He twitched his weapon in his hand, feeling the weight of it. The human had almost reached the cover of the tree when Elshar let it fly. The weapon surged out, wrapping itself around the man's throat, choking the very life out of him. When the aspect warriors of Elshar's squad arrived, there was nothing for them to do except dispatch the wounded. And those were 40 facts on the Eldar versus Chaos. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you guys have any suggestions for any other 2 factions that you guys would like to see head-to-head, I'll see if I can go through the old codex and see if I can find any good battles between whatever factions you guys ask for in the comment section below. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank our patrons on Patreon. It is because of them that we can do this. Link in the description if you guys want to support us. But with all of that said, I'll talk to you tomorrow. This is Gershwan with One Mind Syndicate signing out.
Always used to put my freedom first in any situation.